Imagine losing everything. Your home, your health, your family. Not because you did anything wrong, but because God wanted to prove a point. Of all the books in the Bible, the book of Job has a reputation for being the most unfair. Now, I use the word unfair with caution, because I also believe that this story is a masterpiece, and in this video, I'm going to show you why. So, sit back and get comfortable as I guide you through the full story of the book of Job. By the end, you'll see why I believe it stands among the greatest works of philosophy ever written. Welcome to the book of Job. The book of Job can be found in the Bible's Old Testament and belongs to a group of texts known as the wisdom literature. These texts grapple with life's biggest questions, but Job takes on the greatest of them all. Why do bad things happen to good people? It does this through a simple premise: the story of Job, a man who loses everything, despite never committing a single sin. Now, before we get going, the book of Job can be divided into a few sections, a prologue and an epilogue, which are written in easy-to-read, straightforward prose. The main body of the book is a dialogue between Job and his friends, and it's written in dense Hebrew poetry. And then there's the climax, a series of divine speeches in which God himself addresses Job directly. Now, what makes this unique is that the book sections may be seen to contradict one another. It's almost as if they were written by different people. Alright, let's dive into the story. Meet Job. He's got it all. He's fabulously rich, he has a loving family, but worst of all, he's also the nicest bloke you could ever meet. The Bible gives him the ultimate compliment. He is, quote, blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. In other words, he's an all-round good person, and the perfect guinea pig for a little experiment. Up in heaven, God convenes his divine court, gathering all of his angels before him. Among them is a figure known simply as the adversary, or in Hebrew, the Satan. God notices this mysterious being and asks him, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man." The Satan smirks. He believes Job is only loyal to God because he has blessed him with wealth and a large family. Remove all that, and Job will surely turn against him. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. God agrees to a little wager to test whether Job really is a loyal servant. God allows the Satan to destroy everything Job owns, but forbids him from harming Job physically. And with that, the Satan departs for Earth. In a single instant, Job has lost everything: his livestock, his servants, his family. Job gets up and then begins to worship. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. The next day, God convenes another council. Despite losing everything, it seems that Job has passed the test. He has refused to curse God. The Satan laughs. He is still not convinced. After all, Job has one thing still left: his health. God agrees to raise the stakes of the wager. Satan is now allowed to inflict pain upon Job to see if, even then, he will remain loyal. The Satan travels to Earth once more and strikes Job with painful sores from head to toe. Weak from his affliction, Job resigns himself to his fate and curls up in an ash heap outside the town. Now, he has truly lost everything. Soon, his wife finds him, but she is far from sympathetic. "Do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die." Despite his agony, Job refuses. And with that, Job is left on his own, a broken man. All he has left is his faith in God, the very same God who is responsible for Job's suffering. Days pass, and soon 3 figures stumble across Job. They have heard of Job's suffering and have come to comfort him. They are Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, and they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. We now enter the main section of the book. It's a series of conversations between Job and his 3 friends. Although whether they truly are his friends is very much up for debate. The first friend approaches, Eliphaz the Temanite. In his eyes, God never acts without reason, so Job must have done something to upset him. Eliphaz believes that Job's suffering is a punishment sent from God. Eliphaz talks a good talk, but he's missing something important. We know that Job is completely innocent. In the very first line of the book, we are told that he is blameless. So his suffering is not some sort of divine punishment, it's the result of a wager between God and Satan. Job doesn't know the true reason behind his suffering either, but he's certain that he's not done anything wrong. Despite this, he's at least open to the friend's explanations. At that moment, the second friend, Bildad the Shuhite, steps in, eager to prove Job's guilt. Bildad takes a different approach. What if Job's suffering isn't his fault at all, but his family's? He even suggests that Job's children brought God's wrath, and that Job is paying the price of their sins. Blaming Job's children? That's a low blow, even from Bildad. We know that Job is innocent, but so too are his family. According to the opening verses of the story, Job had a habit of praying on behalf of his family, making them pure in the eyes of God. Once again, Job protests his innocence. He pleads God for mercy, but no help arrives. In his desperation, Job starts to suspect that perhaps God is treating him unfairly. The third friend, Zophar the Naamathite, steps in. All Job needs to do is to say sorry, even if he doesn't know why. With friends like these, who needs enemies? Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar have all weighed in on Job's situation. Each one is convinced that Job has done something wrong, although none of them can say exactly what. The 3 friends share a single worldview, that the universe is predictable. God blesses the good and punishes the wicked. It's a principle found throughout the Old Testament. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But that doesn't apply here, and Job knows it too. Over the course of the dialogues, Job becomes convinced that the friends do not know what they're talking about. And that gives Job an idea. He wants to take God to court. Yes, that's right. He wants God himself to stand trial. But I would speak to the Almighty, and I desire to argue my case with God, even if it costs him his life. Job wants to meet God face to face and make God answer for himself. This courtroom metaphor continues. Job decides that he'll need a lawyer, somebody to plead his case before God. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and at last he will stand upon the earth, and after my skin has thus destroyed, yet in the flesh, I shall see God. To the friends, Job's language against God is verging on the blasphemous. They are frustrated with Job and his stubborn attempts to prove his innocence. By this point, all civil conversation has broken down. The friends resort to inventing crimes, starting with Eliphaz. Seeing as Job himself was once rich, Eliphaz now suspects that Job must have oppressed the poor. Is not your evil abundant? You have given no water to the weary to drink, and you have withheld bread from the hungry. At this point, Job no longer cares what the friends have to say. He knows that they're acting in bad faith. Their arguments are irrelevant, especially as Job believes that he is going to win his lawsuit against God. And then something unexpected happens. An intruder enters the story, someone we've not yet met, a young man named Elihu the Buzite. All this time, Elihu has been listening to Job and the friends, and has been growing more and more frustrated. Despite his youth, Elihu is convinced he can succeed where the friends have failed. Now, young Elihu has a rather nuanced argument. In his view, Job is suffering not for something that he has done, but something that he might do in the future. In his view, God has sent Job a warning to set him on a different timeline, allowing him to learn from his mistakes before he makes them. This Elihu character has come out of nowhere. It's almost as if someone has inserted his speeches halfway through the story. Well, that's actually what might have happened. You see, many scholars believe that Elihu was added later, likely by a younger author. After all, this character is mentioned nowhere else. Elihu finishes by telling Job off for behaving so arrogantly. After all, he's criticizing God, the creator of everything. And reckless talk like that, well, can upset a deity. Suddenly, the skies darken and a whirlwind begins to form. It's God, and he's not happy. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Who, me? God has been listening to Job's debate with the friends, and he is not pleased with what Job has said about him. Speaking from a whirlwind, God has arrived to settle the matter once and for all. Well, sort of. In the speeches that follow, God takes Job on a tour of the universe and shows Job just how small he really is. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Have you commanded the morning since your days began? Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? At this point, I'm sure poor Job is getting the picture. God is infinitely more powerful than him. Who is Job, a puny mortal, to question his creator? But God is not finished. He now takes Job on a tour through the animal kingdom, his kingdom. Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Do you observe the calving of the does? Is the wild ox willing to serve you? At this point, it's as if God has gone full David Attenborough. But God has one more thing to show Job, and it happens to be one of my favourite moments in the Bible. Before Job are two colossal creatures, the most magnificent beings ever to grace creation. The first is Behemoth, the beast of the land. Behold, Behemoth, which I made as I made you. Behold, his strength in his loins. His bones are tubes of bronze, his limbs like bars of iron. Whatever this is, the Behemoth certainly puts the god into Godzilla. Now, biblical scholars believe that this creature is based off a real-life animal, especially given the following description. Under the lotus plant he lies, in the shelter of the reeds and in the marsh. If you guessed a hippo, you'd be right. Or maybe you've seen my Biblical Beasts video. Regardless, God is clearly describing a massive herbivore of immense strength. And the details match that of a hippo rather well. But God has another creature, the Leviathan, the beast of the sea. It's a frightening sight, and God makes sure that Job knows it. Can you draw out the Leviathan with a fish hook, or press down his tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in his nose, or pierce his jaw with a hook? Lay your hands on him. Remember the battle. You will not do it again. This aquatic war machine is God's favorite pet. Based on this description of scales and sharp teeth, scholars believe that this creature might be a crocodile. It's indeed plausible, but then things get a little out of hand. Out of his nostrils come forth smoke. His breath kindles coal, and a flame comes forth from his mouth. The Leviathan appears elsewhere in the Bible and may have been an established mythical being. Across the ancient Near East, many myths tell of a giant aquatic serpent, one defeated by the gods at the dawn of time. This is part of an ancient mythological motif known as the Chaos Kampf, or primordial battle. But in the book of Job, God seems perfectly happy to let the Leviathan be. These two creatures seem to epitomize the wildness of creation, beautiful yet deadly. And with that marvelous tour of creation, God concludes his divine speeches. He has shown Job the wondrous workings of the world and has put this puny mortal into perspective. It's impressive, but has it really answered the original question? Throughout the book, Job has complained that God does not uphold justice in his creation, and has even treated him unfairly. God's response? Hey, look at this. It's a puzzling answer, but maybe there's a deeper point being made. The universe, in all its vastness, does not operate according to the rules that we humans invent. Another curious detail about the divine speeches is that God never mentions the events of the prologue, or even his wager with Satan. You think that would be relevant, right? Regardless, Job finally responds to God, and what follows are the most enigmatic lines in the entire Bible. I had heard you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I despise myself, and repent in dust and ashes. Job is admitting to wrongdoing, and is seeking forgiveness from God. All this raises a serious problem. I've said it once, and I'll say it again. Job is innocent. That's the premise of the book. Plus, we know why he's suffering. It was God, well, playing God. Some find this lack of answers frustrating, as well as Job's seemingly unnecessary apology. In any case, it seems that Job has grasped God's message. The ways of God are simply too unknowable for humans to ever truly understand. And with that, the poetry section of the book comes to an end, and the style returns to the simple prose of the introduction. God turns to Eliphaz and the friends, burning with rage. My anger burns against you and your 2 friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. For all their posturing and philosophizing, the friends have been proven incorrect by God. Instead, it was Job who was right all along. Wait, what? Job can't be right about everything, right? Throughout the story, Job has accused God of being angry, violent, unforgiving, unhelpful, and even as his enemy. Job has been openly disparaging against God. So God praising Job feels a little confusing. The book now approaches its final lines, but the story has one more trick up its sleeve. After Job had prayed for his friends, the Lord restored his fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had before. After everything Job has gone through, God has finally restored him to his former glory. New livestock, new servants, and even a new family. Though many have noted that the text says nothing about restoring Job to his former health. Like any good fairy tale, Job and his new family live happily ever after. And after this, Job lived 140 years and saw his sons and his sons' sons 4 generations. And Job died, an old man and full of days. The Book of Job is a rich and winding story. From God and Satan's cosmic wager to the philosophical weight of the dialogues and the vivid imagery of the divine speeches. The key question readers have about the Book of Job is this: does the book really tell us why bad things happen to good people? If you isolate certain parts of the story, you might think the answer is clear. At the start, it's the result of a unique wager between God and Satan. But in the dialogues, the reason shifts entirely. To the friends, Job's suffering is a punishment, plain and simple. To Job, it's because creation itself is unfair and that God is rigging the system. And if you ask God, look, a Leviathan. When you bring these elements together, there's no straightforward answer. In fact, the book actively contradicts itself, offering multiple perspectives on the problem of evil, leaving the audience questioning everything. And that's why I think this book is a masterpiece, because there's no single right answer that solves the story. Whether or not this is intentional is a matter of debate. Biblical scholars will point to the text's complex editorial history, suggesting that it began with the dialogues and then was expanded by later writers, each bringing their own viewpoint. It's almost as if the book is in conversation with itself. So, is the Book of Job the Bible's most unfair story? Perhaps. But ultimately, that's up to you. I hope my retelling and commentary has inspired you to read this ancient story. It only takes a couple of hours, so I've provided a link down in the description if you'd like to get started. In the meantime, there's one character in the story who leaves without a trace: Satan. If you're curious about the Book of Job's most elusive figure, check out my recent video on Paradise Lost, where I explore the tragic fate of heaven's brightest star. Hey, thanks for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this one. If you liked this video and want to see more, why not subscribe? A like and a comment also go a really long way. Now, if you'd like to support the channel and join me in making more videos like this, do check out my Patreon. I've recently released an exclusive Q&A, so don't miss out. Here's a clip. Is there anything of interest in the etymology of biblical names? Yes, for sure. The Bible is full of characters, and full of characters with interesting names. Abraham is related to the word father, and that kind of makes sense because he's the father of the nation. Other times they're kind of jokes or puns. I'm thinking of Adam, which is kind of related to the word Adamah, which means clay, because God made Adam from clay. It's kind of a little joke there. Anyway, I look forward to seeing you next time. Goodbye.